So let's continue improving the logic of our snowball. And once we get the snowball buttoned up, we'll make this thing a prefab. So the next thing that I'm going to do, if you remember from the previous presentation, we have multiple states here. We have the add for state, which launches the snowball. We have the get collision info, which stores the object that we ran into. So remember, we have this hit object, so we're dynamically capturing the object that we run into. We're using a game object compare to send that off to different events. And the reason here is that when we hit an enemy, for example, or we hit an untagged object, we can then execute some kind of function on that object. Now, to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new cube, new 3D object, and I'm going to move this kind of out in space. And I'm going to make this object fairly large, so it's easy to hit. So make it 5 by 5, and we'll continue to send this out in space. So I'm pretty sure I'll be able to hit that with my snowball. Okay. Now again, I'm using kind of the automatic snowball that launches itself inside the scene to test this. So this is going to be our test object, and we're going to create a debug object so that we can kind of see the projectile logic all the way through, make sure things are working okay. So I'm going to go back to my snowball object for a minute, and my snowball object flings itself. Once it has the system event, the collision enter, it passes it to get the collision info, and we store the object. Now, once we hit an untagged object in this example, what I want to do is I want to capture or reference the object that I hit and send an event on the object that I hit. Okay, in other words, I'm going to go to my test object, and I'm going to add a state machine. And I'll just simply call this idle. Okay. And now I'm going to go into the event system, and I'm going to say, I've been hit. Okay, and I'm using a very long name that's intentional. Okay, and I'm going to right click and add that I've been hit as a transition, and I'll fire that over to state 1. Okay, now I'm going to go back into my snowball. So this is just a real simple I've been hit event. We don't have any actions on this state, but what I want to do is when the ball hits this object, or excuse me, the snowball hits this object, I want to be able to fire off I've been hit. So if I go back to my snowball and I go to my hit untagged, right, because this object, we have not yet tagged this object. So the logic is that if our snowball hits this thing, it's going to flow through to untagged hit. In fact, I can test that. Okay, so we've hit this untagged object. Okay, I'll toggle the play button. Now, when we hit this untagged object, what we want to do is we want to go into state machine, and we want to be able to send an event based on this interaction. So somewhere in here is a send event. There it is, double click. And what we want to do is we want to send an event not to ourselves, but we want to send event to a game object. And the game object is not the owner. It's a little redundant. We want to specify a game object, and the game object that we want to specify is dynamic. And it's the result of this hit object. So I'm going to toggle the button here. I'm going to toggle this from hardwiring a game object to this variable. And so the idea is that if we end up on hit untagged, in this case, we're going to run this send event, and we're going to figure out the object that we hit, and we're going to fire off an event. And the send event that we want to fire off should show up here in this list. I've been hit. There it is. We have all of our events are listed here, and I'll choose that I have been hit. So now if I go back to my test object and I hit the play button, when that ball hits, there we go. You can see that state 1 has been fired. Okay, so again, we'll toggle the play button. I'll just move this, I'll move the snowball over a little bit so we know that we're not hitting it. Okay, and we missed it, so I'll go check out my test object, and you can see it has not yet been hit. It's still in the idle state. Okay, however, the snowball flung off somewhere and hit the terrain object, which there's no logic there to resolve anything for the terrain object. So, and we could probably, have some unique functionality to where if the snowball hits the ground, it's just there for the enemy to pick it back up and fling it back at us, or whatever the case. But this test object, again, if I take my snowball, I can select my snowball here. Where'd it go? There's my snowball. And I'll just move this back in so that I'm pretty sure I'm going to hit this object now. I'll go back to my test object and hit play. We fling the snowball, we hit that object, and it fired an event based on getting hit with that projectile. This is a very valuable thing because now what we can do on state 1, this is a state that basically says I've been hit. Okay, and at this point we can do whatever we want to the object. Okay, in this case we could destroy the object, we could reduce health. In this case I might change the color. Let me see if I can change the texture of this. So yeah, we'll set a material texture here on the owner of the object, and the material that we'll set, I think I have a material. Yeah, I got a material in here. So let me go back to my test object. I'll just set the material. There we go. So we should see this object turn blue when it gets hit. Let's see if that works. Oh, it did not. So probably because I'm still on the default material. I'll tinker with that and see. I really want to get this object to debug itself so that we get kind of clear results of visibly seeing what's happening when we hit this. So we'll tinker with that. But go ahead and set up this kind of logic so that when you're hitting objects, it's executing I've been hit, or running a hit transition, and make sure that works, because that's going to be a key component to making our game scalable so that every time we have a projectile in the scene, it'll run into something and do damage accordingly. In the next presentation, we'll mock up real simple return fire from our dummy objects here inside the scene. This will be kind of the core logic for what will ultimately be our enemy AI, but we'll do that in the next presentation.